Okay, here's the first one this morning. The first one is this: what do you do when you know what to do, but you're hesitant to do it? And that is to recognize that you're frozen. You know, that day when I was on the high dive in Fossil Park, as I stood there at the edge, I was frozen. I knew I didn't want to go back down the ladder, but I also didn't want to go down in front of everybody here. In other words, I couldn't move. I was frozen. Now, my teacher, she could see that I was frozen. The other kids in my class, they could see that I was frozen. Everybody at the pool could see that I was frozen. But friends, you know who didn't see that I was frozen? Me. Because in my mind, time had stopped. I was so overwhelmed by the situation that was in front of me, I didn't even recognize that I had frozen. You see, after Jesus ascended into heaven, the disciples were essentially frozen. Take a look at this. Verse 10, it says, they were looking intently up into the sky as he was going, when suddenly 2 men dressed in white stood beside them. Men of Galilee, they said, why do you stand here looking into the sky? Now, just for a moment here, I want you to do what the disciples did. I want you to look up. Okay, just look up at the ceiling. And I want you to focus intently or look intently at something that you see. For example, it could be a spot or a groove or a corner of something. If you're staring at a bright light, I would highly recommend looking at something else, okay? Just keep looking at that item for a minute, and as you're doing that, I want you to think about this for a moment. How long could you look at the item that you're looking at? How long could you look at it? Maybe for seconds? Minutes? Hours? Days? I imagine that for many of us here today, the answer is probably not very long because your neck is already starting to hurt, isn't it? Isn't it funny we don't really look up that much? Go ahead and put your heads back down. You see, here's the point. Whenever you're staring intently at something, oftentimes, typically, you don't even see or recognize that you're frozen. You ever done that before? You're looking at something, you're staring at something, you're frozen, you can't see that you're frozen. Everybody else around you, they can see it, but you can't see it because you're focused so intently on whatever you're staring at. And you see, in Acts chapter 1, not only were the disciples physically frozen, but they were also emotionally frozen. Remember, when Jesus appeared to them right in this moment, they thought this was going to be the beginning of part 2 of Jesus' ministry. Like, Jesus, let's go. And Jesus is like, oh, I'm going to go, but not in the way that you think. And then what does he do? He gives them instructions of what he wants them to do, and before they can even process this, he literally ascends into heaven. And so here are the disciples, they're looking up into the sky, both physically and mentally and emotionally frozen. And all of a sudden, these 2 angels appear and they say, whoa, whoa, guys, why are you frozen? Why are you looking up into the sky? You see, friends, sometimes we find ourselves facing situations where we know what to do and we're hesitant to do it. And so what do? We hit the pause button. We put it on hold. We freeze. And oftentimes, because we're so focused on the issue that's in front of us, we don't even recognize that we've frozen. For example, have you ever had a friend who had a situation that they needed to handle? They were talking to you about it, and they said, hey, I got this problem. I know what to do. I'm just not sure if I can do it. And what's your advice? Well, it sounds like you need to do it. And so a few weeks later, you see them, and you get some lunch, or you catch up with them, and they say, hey, I haven't done it yet. You're like, okay, well, maybe next time. A few weeks later, you get with them together. They still haven't done it. And in your mind, you're thinking, what are they doing? Why haven't they done what they know they need to do? I mean, it seems so obvious to you, but you see, that's the whole point. Oftentimes, it's not obvious to the other person because when they're so focused intently on the situation that's in front of them, they can't even see that they're frozen. You see, some of us here this morning have situations in front of us where we know what to do, we know we need to address them, but we haven't addressed them yet because we're frozen. For some of us, we've been frozen for days. Some of us have been frozen for weeks or months. Some of us have been frozen for years. We know what to do. We know how to do it. All we have to do is do it, and yet here we are frozen. And as the disciples in Acts chapter 1 remind us this morning, unless we can first recognize that we're frozen, we're going to continue to stand on the edge and never actually make the jump.